Hello, and you are listening to Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. If you are listening for the first time, I interview leaders who inspire me in the areas of hardcore IT security, IT business leadership, innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, and fearless living principles. Welcome to the show. Hello, and welcome to episode number 43 of the Red Zone podcast, where I invite IT security innovators, leading entrepreneurial minds, and inspiring individuals to share their stories and offer the best tips to help you achieve success in IT security and business thought leadership, the neuroscience of optimal performance, creativity, and innovation. I'm your host, Bill Murphy, and in today's show, I'm excited to bring to you my interview with Zack Schuler. Zack is the founder and CEO of Ninjio, which is an IT security awareness company. 95% of all breaches are caused by human error. It seems like an obvious problem, but what can you do about it? Zack's company has developed a way using a team of Hollywood writers, which he gets into, to developing compelling and entertaining security education and training, not just to have your IT professionals involved in IT defense, but have all of your employees involved, to have the amplification of having your entire employee base on your side, not just your current direct team. So what else are you going to get from this episode? Well, we're going to learn about the importance of gamification in security training and developing a security culture. I love this concept of gamification, and there's a great book called Super Better that is a wonderful book in talking about gamification and its impact. The second piece is the importance of entertainment and storytelling, and how that can really foster a culture of security education and training. And then how to develop training easily in an efficient manner, and also how to measure the effectiveness of it. So just briefly before we jump in, I just want to mention our sponsor. Our sponsor is the CIO Security Scoreboard. If you're interested in transforming and maturing your ability to distill complexity and present simply and powerfully in IT security, governance, and risk areas to your vertical reports or your horizontal peers, check out visualcio.com. Again, that's visualcio.com. So with this, I want to welcome you to my interview with Zack Schuler. Well, Zack, I want to welcome you to the show today.
Thank you so much, Bill.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and how you decided to found a company, your company, Ninjio.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the IT business, security business for about 20 years now. I started by founding an IT consulting firm that focused on outsourcing for the small and mid-market and special projects for the enterprise. And, one thing that I noticed is every time I would walk through my network operations center of my old firm, I would notice my guys spending a lot of time dealing with malware and breaches and viruses and all that kind of good stuff. And what was crazy to me is that we were super focused on technology, putting in, all sorts of point products around security. But no matter what we did, and especially in the last couple of years, it didn't really matter what we put in place. There were threats that still made their way through. I ended up exiting that business. I wanted to do something new, and so I sold that business to a private equity firm in October of 2013. And then within a year or so thereafter, I conceptualized Ninjio. And really my drive was to answer that nagging question of, how are we really securing the weakest link in the chain and really the last line of defense? And, if a company's got 500 people, I view that as 500 endpoints. That's 500 people or 500 endpoints that, a threat actor can make their way through. And so I really felt like I wanted to do something that focused on the human as opposed to focusing on the technology.
Well, I think it's really powerful, and it's so funny that you were saying that all of this money is being spent on all the fancy tools and products. But the reality is, for just as you're mentioning, the small to medium business, large businesses, if you have a company of 1,000 employees or 100 employees, you have the opportunity to have 1,000 people that can watch your back, or 100 people that can watch your back and be totally aligned with what you, maybe the 1 or the 10 person security operations may be trying to do it all yourselves when you can leverage the power of everybody in the company.
Yeah, that's right. And if they're educated, they are watching your back. If they're not educated, they're all, potential attack vectors or potential attack points, right? And so, the key is, in my mind, creating a culture, not only of security awareness, but a culture of a kind of a phrase that I coined called security behavior modification. And that's making it such that you're so in tune with what's going on with your PC and the stuff that hits you every day. You always want your end user to ask the question and be a little suspicious of everything that comes through, and say, "Is somebody trying to trick me? Is somebody trying to take advantage of me?" And when you have that, and when you have those thoughts going through your user community, then you're exactly right. You have 1,000 or 100 people that have your back, and so that's what Ningio is off to do, and we do it in a really, really unique way.
Yeah, and I want to get to that in a moment of how you do it, because it is unique. And it's funny, when you listen to the video that's on your website, it said 95% of security breaches are caused by human error. I actually wrote a blog post about that a couple of months ago, and it is stunning. Even if you're off by a couple percentage points, even if you're off by 20%, it's still a stunning amount that is actually we're causing our own breaches, whether it's the IT administrative staff or the people at the endpoints. So it's a really interesting approach that you're taking to just focusing on education.
Yeah, and it's crazy because you could take 1,000 employee enterprise, and they'll spend upwards of $100,000 on security point products, whether it's firewalls, IPS, IDS, managed SIEM, managed HIPS, whatever it is. They'll spend a lot of money on technology. And then you ask them about their security awareness program, and they say, we kick out an email once a month, and we hope that people read it. And, hundreds of thousands of money spent, to block threats, when 95% of them, according to IBM, that's how they get through, is through the human. And so I think people have really under-invested in the human, and so I think that's the opportunity here.
So a couple of things that really stuck out for me was your use of stories, your gamification, and creating an interactive environment. Maybe you could talk to those related to what your approach is with your product and how you intend and how you're delivering the solutions to people and how you're educating them. Because I found your stories. I was reading on one of your blog posts about your stories related to your skiing. Maybe you could go through that skiing story that you wrote on your blog, and then we talk about how that the power of that related to your product.
Yeah. So I think stories. Whenever you hear a story, I think they stick with you better than anything else does. And another example that I gave is, you think back 10 years ago and pick any hour and a half lecture that you sat through, maybe in college, or maybe it was 20 years ago, and then pick a movie that you watched for an hour and a half. What are you more likely to remember, the movie or that hour and a half long lecture? I would say 99% of people would say, well, of course I'm going to remember the movie. And you'd say, well, why? Well, because the movie was based on a story, and the story, makes sense in my head with, a beginning, a middle, and an ending. And people just have a much better recollection of stories, movies, TV shows, etc. And so when I set out to say, how do I think people are best going to learn, A, and how do I think they're best going to be able to retain the information, B, I really went to a story-based format. And then I said, well, how can I make that even better? And the way that I did that was I partnered, one of the partners in the business is a writer for Hawaii Five-0 and CSI. Hawaii Five-0 is a newish, pilot or episode on TV, or episodes. And so I said, if I get this guy to write these stories that are all based on actual security breaches, breaches that have actually happened, and then as we put them out to the users, they say, oh, the Jeep breach or the Ashley Madison breach or the Sony Pictures breach, yes, I remember those. They're a lot more likely to want to consume them, and then as they consume them, they're a lot more likely to remember them. And so we're taking a storyline that's a real storyline, creating a story around it, then applying our own attack vector to that so that we have that teachable moment. And we're really convinced that this is the best way to get people to actually learn and to actually change the culture as it relates to security.
So your approach is basically taking stories to change the culture of how people receive information about security so that it actually is a bit more entertaining for them that they're actually learning something, but they're actually being entertained by a professional at the same time.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at training right now, I mean, especially training that doesn't help you professionally or personally, like security awareness training, much like sexual harassment training or ethics training, is one of those trainings that you don't really need to actually do your job. It's an oh, by the way kind of thing. And so to get users engaged in that type of training is really difficult, right? Because if you're into cooking and you go to you take a culinary class where you're going to pay attention because it's interesting to you. Security awareness for most people isn't interesting, and so you have to take another route to get them to pay attention, and that's through storytelling.
Now, how do you deal with the fact, and I think it's interesting because I came in, I was representing, there was a security documentation or getting employees to sign. So it used to be when you got hired, you would sign essentially an employment agreement, and that was it. Well, now that security is changing so frequently, and things change related to mobile devices and password management policies and computer use, and that there's almost decoupling these policies, and now the regulators are requiring policies that I was talking to people about different solutions, and they said, oh, you have to talk to our HR department because they handle all the human being related items within the organization. And I would imagine that there's going to be sometimes people within HR are going to be responsible for pushing out training when really the CISO or the CIO is going to want to get the training out from their angle. Like, how are you going to bridge both worlds?
That's a great question. So what I have found is that this gets handed to HR, and HR looks at it and they go, oh, wow, this is technical. When in fact it's really not. But it normally gets dumped onto the CIO or the CISO's desk. And then the bad part about that is that, CIOs, we're not in the training business. We're in the technology business. And so HR knows how to train, or assumedly, or they know how to package training or deliver it or make it, impactful. IT is not really in that business, but yet HR dumps it onto them because they see it as technical. And I agree, it should be delivered vis-a-vis HR. It should be HR that's pushing it out, or it should be HR and IT kind of as a teaming up to push it out. But it is a challenge. There's a little, back and forth, and it just kind of depends on the organization and their philosophy. But I would say that literally 80% of the time, this training is ending up in the lap of the CIO or the CISO. And because they don't have to do training all the time, a lot of times they just don't know what to do with it, or they don't know how to deploy it, and they don't have a lot of ideas, and they don't have a lot of time, for sure. And that's where our, program comes in really handy, because it's truly a managed service. And so you can hand over, the reins to us in terms of, simply providing us with a user list, first name, last name, email address, and department. It goes into our cloud-based LMS, and then we take care of the deployment. So we literally take it right off the desk of the CIO or the CISO, which is, why we're getting the traction that we're getting right now.
And then just monthly, you'll update and provide a new set of videos to people within that are subscribed? Okay.
Yep. So as a video is completed and it's the beginning of the month and we're ready to release a new one, we simply upload it into our LMS. We then go through each client. We deploy the video segment to each user. We give them in the emails, usually, and this is up to the company, but normally 72 hours to 7 days to view the content. They view the content. Once it's completed, they get an email with a certificate that says, yay, you've completed the content. And then they get, in that email, a link to our blog, which has additional reading. And one of the main points of the reading is, hey, if you want to find out how this breach really happened and you want kind of the lowdown We send them, the best article that we've scoured that we can find that talks about the breach and really how it happened. And then, in the case of, say, social media, social engineering, we'll include additional reading content for those that want to go deeper, and how do I protect myself? How do I set my privacy settings on Facebook? How do I do this? How do I do that? And so, for those that want to go deep, we give them the ability to go deep and really protect themselves.
So how would a company keep track of, let's say they had 200 employees they wanted this out to on January through the rest of the year, and how would they know who's watched and who hasn't watched specifically?
It's a great question. So the content's hosted on our cloud-based learning management system. At each client, there's an administrator at the client where they can administer their group. And so they have the ability of going onto a dashboard, and that dashboard has a reporting mechanism that will allow them to, at will, pull a report on any particular episode, see what the participation rate was, see how long it took the user to complete it, whether or not they completed it in the first place, et cetera, et cetera. And so it gives them full visibility into how their users are progressing through the training. And I think what's remarkable is that on all the users that we've got on the platform right now, our lowest participation rate is 53%. Our highest participation rate is 94%. And so we're really getting good adoption, and people are actually watching this. And as I said, as I feel, when they watch it, they learn and they become more secure.
It'd be interesting is there's a company called KnowBe4. Have you heard of them?
Absolutely.
Be interesting if you did a test with users where you actually do a video training on like phishing and malware, and I call it the DCS, don't click shit. Basically, don't click stuff you shouldn't be clicking, and you do an education piece on that, and then immediately after the video comes out, let's say a couple weeks or a week after, run a KnowBe4 test and test all those users for that. That would be an interesting kind of validation for maybe even do it before
effectiveness.
Maybe even do it before you get involved and before KnowBe4 is there, and then come in after the fact and do the test. That'd be interesting before and after.
I think that's a great idea. I think KnowBe4 probably would view us as a competitor in some sense, and the reality is that I think with a lot of security awareness companies, we layer on top of what they do. A lot of them have kind of more traditional lessons that might go a bit deeper into a particular topic, which means longer, which means, in my mind, more boring. So I think a company could probably implement that sort of training, and then they can take ours and layer it on top. Because ours is so low touch, it's high touch, but it's low time. But KnowBe4 would be good, or Fishline, or FishMe, or one of those companies. That would be a great idea to do kind of a before and after. And our fourth episode that's coming out is on a spear phishing attack, and specifically around Sony.
Oh, interesting.
And kind of how that happened. So that would be, a pretty good episode to do that on.
Yeah, interesting. It was just something that was brainstorming as we were talking. The other piece too, which is interesting, is you have a game, kind of a gaming piece where you're, or maybe I'm using the wrong word, but
gamification.
Gamification, yeah. Is that something that you're building into the product?
That's right. So it is. So there's a few pieces to it, right? So as you go through each episode, toward the end of the episode, there's a challenge, which is a fancy word for a quiz. And so it might ask you, of these four things, throw away the bad answers. And so there's an interactive component where the user clicks on the bad answers and throws them into a trash can. And then they, click submit or complete, and, they see if they got the answer right. What's going to end up happening is we're building a dashboard, and that'll be live at the end of May. And the dashboard will report on who's watched the episode, who hasn't, and who answered the challenges right the first time. If you got the first time, they get a maximum number of points. If they answer the challenge right the second time, they get a smaller number of points. And if they answer the challenge right the third time, they get a box of tissues. And so we are tracking what the users are doing, and then what we have the ability, or what we're going to have the ability to do with the leaderboard, is the company can say, we want the leaderboard. If it's small, they'll probably have employees compete with employees, but if they're larger, they'll have departments compete against departments. And then what you do is you get the department head to say, whoa, I'm competing for something, and then you get them to get their employees to make sure that they've watched it. And then I think we just increase engagement through the competition part of the gamification.
Well, sure. And I don't know if you've read the book Super Better by Jane McGonigal. Have you read that?
I haven't.
Jane she's a neuroscientist, and she's spoken at actually 3 TED Talks. She's like millions of people have watched her. She's a game researcher, and she's written a couple really interesting books on studying gamification and the power of that in a lot of different aspects, from our children and all the way into business. And so it would be so. As soon as I read that about your product, I thought, gosh, that's really something powerful, because not only potentially leveraging from an education and interest from the video content, the storytelling, but then also link that to making it fun, and making with that power comes again the leverage of a lot of people. You could take that a couple different ways of really turning it into gaming, and people get really engaged, and they'll really deeply will take the lessons into even more based on this. So it's a really interesting approach you have.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we, when I set out to do this, I kind of had a blank slate, and I said, how would I want to consume and learn about this if I was just a regular guy that didn't know much about security? And I said, short, consistent, repetitive, so every 30 days, story-based, and gamified.
Yeah.
And I feel like we hit on those points, and then, of course, great content, right? So we hit on those points, and we really have a solution that we feel, at the end of the day, it actually works.
You're based out of L.A., right?
We're based out, just north of Los Angeles.
I was going to say, you'll have no problem getting access to writers and good content creators, right?
No, in fact, our animator is sitting 20 feet from me, so he's a full-time employee. Partner in the business is the writer for CSI and Hawaii Five-0.
Wow!
And then we've got music scoring people. We've got a voice acting studio that we use in Sherman Oaks. So to your point, we are surrounded by talent, and so that's another reason I think that makes our product so unique. Is the talent that we employ, and we've got almost a $20,000 per episode budget, to put out a 3 to 4 minute video, which is pretty significant. And so we don't take this lightly.
No, you aren't, and I think that that's gonna definitely come across with the people, and it's significant impact. With educating employees, significant. In fact, I would say when that comes out in the risk analysis, when the risk assessments that I end up doing with our clients, and there's always the human awareness piece that comes out as really low scores, and I'm like, gosh, don't buy anything, just do this, just educate employees, and you can boost the effectiveness of your security program by a factor of 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I know you got to get going, and I appreciate your time, Zack, in this interview. Listeners are going to really appreciate kind of hearing this novel approach that they can deploy quickly. And what would be a good way for my listeners to reach out to you to learn more?
So probably a good way is to go to our website. It's www.ninjio, ninjio.com. And at the bottom of the site, there's a contact form. They can submit that, and then we'll be in touch. And people are always free to email me directly. It's Zack, ZACK, at ninjio.com, ninjio.com. So they can email me directly as well. And either way works perfectly fine.
Great. Well, I'll put this in the show notes to make sure people have that access. And again, I appreciate for your time today, Zack.
All right, no problem. Thank you so much.
So there you have it. This wraps another episode of Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. To get all the relevant show notes, please go to our blog at www.redzonetech.net/podcast. Additionally, make sure you go to iTunes and leave your comments in iTunes about the show. This helps our show rankings enormously and it helps support the show. Until next time, I appreciate you very much for listening. Thank you.